She was royalty, she was brilliant, and she partied so hard her own father banished her for life. Julia the Elder didn't just break Rome's rules, she burned them. Here's what really happened to the Emperor Augustus's daughter. Julia the Elder was the daughter of the most powerful man in Rome, and by all accounts, she knew it. Born in 39 BCE, she was the eldest child of Octavian, later known as Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, and his first wife. Unfortunately for Julia though, she wasn't the apple of her father's eye. That title belonged to his daughter from his second wife, Livia Drusilla, who was born several years after Julia from his second wife, Livia Drusilla. According to Cassius Dio, Julia had a harsh temper and a cruel streak, which may have contributed to her father sending her away to be raised by her grandmother on the Greek island of Lesbos. But that doesn't mean she didn't get the finest education money could buy. In fact, she was probably smarter than most men in Rome. Like many members of the imperial family, Julia studied rhetoric and philosophy. Unlike her peers, she took it very seriously. As an adult, she was said to be a formidable debater and enjoyed nothing more than proving she could outsmart her opponents. To put her skills to use, she hosted regular philosophical competitions at her home in Athens. Male intellectuals would arrive from all over the empire to show off their knowledge and win her favor. And even though she never married, she was a fixture at parties. Julia was also well-traveled, visiting Egypt, Greece, and even Asia Minor. But no matter where she went, she couldn't escape her famous last name. That was especially true when her father arranged for her to marry her cousin Tiberius. Now, you might recall that Tiberius went on to become the second emperor of Rome, but before he inherited the purple, he was a military officer, a position he took very seriously. Unfortunately, Julia didn't take her role as future empress seriously at all. First, there was the issue of the wedding itself. Julia's cousin Tiberius was stationed in a Roman province in what is now northern Italy. When their fathers agreed he would marry Julia, naturally, the wedding took place there instead of in Rome. This enraged Julia, who felt the ceremony should have been held in the capital. She refused to travel to such a low-class location and spent 2 years sulking, until Tiberius came to Rome and convinced her to go. But that was only the beginning of the problems between them. According to Suetonius, Julia was already married when she met Tiberius. Her first husband, a young senator named Lucius Cassius, had died under mysterious circumstances, and some suspected Julia of murdering him. Whether she was guilty or not, the rumor hurt her chances of having a happy marriage with Tiberius. He disliked her from the start and was horrified to discover she was carrying another man's child when they wed. Soon after, she became pregnant again, this time with Tiberius's baby. Even so, he divorced her. The couple had a son together, but their relationship never improved. So when Tiberius was called to serve in the army, he left Julia behind in Rome with orders not to follow him. Unfortunately, she didn't listen. Julia showed up at her father's villa in Athens, then set off to join her ex-husband on the campaign trail. Along the way, she engaged in scandalous behavior like hosting parties with gladiators. When her father found out, he sent her back to Rome. Clearly, he thought being closer to his daughter would help keep tabs on her. Instead, it gave her easier access to Rome's best brothels. There she prostituted herself for both money and power. At one point, she was the mistress of Lucius Aegeus. Their affair ended badly, however, and Julia was accused of poisoning him. Once again, she may have been innocent, but the rumors did her reputation no good. To make matters worse, Tiberius finally returned to Rome in 14 CE and moved into the palace next door to Julia. Each morning, he would peer over the wall and watch his ex-wife bathing, then criticize her choice of swimwear. As you can imagine, she hated him. In fact, she despised the entire imperial family, except perhaps her grandfather, the original Augustus. So while her father was alive, she was careful not to cross him. The problem was, she didn't know when to stop pushing her luck. It started with a small insult. When her father died in 14 CE, and Tiberius took the throne, Julia celebrated by releasing poisonous snakes into the audience at the gladiator games. Then she made a series of terrible decisions. First, she eloped with a married man named Cornelius Bal. He was a senator and former governor of Africa, a loyal friend of Augustus, and a respected member of the Senate. For Julia was love at first sight. After eloping, she made a public spectacle of their marriage, giving expensive gifts to her friends and throwing parties with chariots. To pay for it, she used money originally intended to fund public projects, like a temple to the goddess Minerva. Naturally, the people were furious, and when Tiberius found out about the affair, he was outraged. His advisors, however, encouraged him to overlook it, given that Julia had once been his wife and the mother of his son. But as we shall see, forgiveness was not part of the equation. In the meantime, Julia and Balbus bought a huge mansion near the Tiber River and filled it with stolen artwork. They bragged about their collection, which included items looted from temples, then invited the emperor to come see it for himself. It was a disaster. As soon as Tiberius stepped foot inside, Julia greeted him with a kiss and tried to push him toward her bedroom. He drew his sword and demanded to know how she dared disrespect him. Julia shrugged and told him to control his temper, then ordered her slaves to bring out the expensive wine. Hoping to calm down, Tiberius sat on a couch to regain his composure, but it collapsed under his weight. Julia laughed and suggested he try the bed instead. Still seething, Tiberius decided to visit the gardens. He stopped at a fountain and dipped his hands into the water, when suddenly the statue of a horse nearby shook, then reared up and flew. Julia was nowhere to be seen, but he heard her voice saying, "There goes my handsome young nephew," as clumsy as ever. Furious, Tiberius stormed home, ripped off his toga and plunged directly into his bathtub. Julia entered shortly after, but didn't seem concerned about her husband's distress. She dove into the bath and wrapped her arms around his neck, but he shoved her into a pillar. Blood trickled down her arm and stained the water red, at which point Tiberius finally lost his temper. Cassius Dio wrote that he dragged Julia out of the tub and slapped her across the face. When she insulted him, he punched her in the stomach. Then he ordered her to leave his house immediately and not come back without his permission. But if he hoped that would be the end of it, he was mistaken. Julia spent the night at her friend Ash's house, then returned home the following day to pack her things. She loaded up a wagon with gold coins and drove to the port, where she boarded a ship bound for the island of Pontius. In the meantime, Tiberius got a report from his spies informing him that Julia had been spotted in Athens. Concerned that she might be causing trouble, he dispatched his Praetorian guards to bring her back to Rome, but Julia was too quick for them. She fled to the Egyptian capital of Alexandria, where she was welcomed like a celebrity. The royal family gave her a villa and threw lavish parties in her honor. Unfortunately, the good times didn't last long. In 29 CE, Tiberius had her arrested and charged with plotting against him. Whether or not she was involved in a conspiracy, he wasn't taking any chances. Julia was loaded onto a ship and taken to a small island in the middle of the Nile called There she spent her days in a small cottage and her nights sleeping on a stone floor. 4 years later, she was moved to the island of Pandateria and forced to live like a slave. Cassius Dio claims Tiberius planned to kill her, but she died of natural causes in 26 CE. Either way, the story doesn't end there. Julia's son, Gaius, didn't like hearing about his mother's misadventure. He asked his father not to tell her stories about her miserable life on the island, but Tiberius obliged anyway. Eventually, Gaius took the throne as Caligula, and if you know anything about him, you know he partied harder than anyone else in Rome. So what do you think? Did Julia have a rough childhood, or was she simply a spoiled brat? Let us know your thoughts, and thank you for watching.